Whether we like it or not, we all have habits when we draw. From the little things we do when we sketch, to the mindset we approach art with. The thing with habits is that they are automatic, and good ones quietly make us better artists, while bad ones can hold our progress back. That's why in this video, I'm going to share with you 8 tiny but game-changing habits that help take my art from that of a clueless beginners to a level where I could work professionally for various companies. By the way, if you happen to be new here, hey, I'm Ori. I'm an illustrator, and on this channel, I make videos that explore how to improve both our art and ourselves. Also, quick thanks to Printful for kindly sponsoring today's video. If you want to turn your art into high-quality merch you can sell without having to worry about extra fees and upfront costs, check out the link below. Okay, let's start with the habit that fixed an embarrassing number of problems in my art. When I was a beginner, I learned to draw the anime face one way, following a tutorial, and then I basically used it for everything else. But the problem with this was that it made my faces, particularly the eyes I drew, look the same no matter what angle I was drawing the head in. For example, in a 3/4 view like this, when the eyes are looking at the camera, the eyes basically goes towards the edge like this. And this is because there's basically the structure of the nose bridge there, and so it forms the shape. But because back then I was just drawing the eyes the same way as I had memorized it, I would put what was basically front view eyes on a 3/4 face like this. And so if I were just to isolate these eyes, you can see that this pretty much just looks like front view eyes, like so. And it doesn't take into account the structure of the nose bridge that I mentioned earlier. And so what I should have really done with this was take into account the 3D structure of the face. And so these eyes, because it's 3/4 and looking at the camera, it would be going towards the edge of the eyes here. And the 3/4 eyes should look like so. So if we were to compare it, this doesn't really look like it's looking at the camera, and it's also looking kind of flat because again, these were front view eyes, not taking into account the 3D structure of a 3/4 view face. And if the structure was to be taken more into account, it would look more like so. So as you can see, it makes quite a bit of a difference. And so here's the habit to take away. Always think in 3D when you draw. Because when you do so, you'll avoid all the common pitfalls that can make your drawing look flat or off. This also brings us to the second habit. When you shade, you're not shading hair or skin. You're shading a 3D object that's sitting under a light source. That sounds obvious, but early on, I didn't really think of it like that. For example, when it came to hair, I didn't really have a good understanding of what I was shading. I just knew that I needed to add shadows and highlights in some way, because that's what the tutorials would tell me to do, but I wasn't too sure how it all really worked. This ended up in me randomly adding shadows and highlights because I needed to, rather than putting them on intentionally based on how it would look like in that lighting situation. So the shading for my hair would always end up looking flat and weird. What I should have actually done was to think of the form. Hair is still an object that has form, and how the shadows look will always depend on how light falls upon it. For example, here, the light source is from above, and so the shadows for the hair fall like this based on its form. Similarly, another thing I missed for a long time in my shading, because I wasn't thinking about the form, were edge shadows. Round objects have subtle edge shadows as they curve away. This is because as the form turns away from you, that side bounces less light into your eyes, so it naturally gets darker. This means when you're shading a character, you can also apply this principle to many parts, such as the skin, because body parts aren't flat forms. So for example, I like to add edge shadows to the head, limbs, and other parts of the body. I don't apply this everywhere or all the time, but I found that adding them in helps to add an extra touch that makes the character feel more three-dimensional and grounded in the scene. So here's the habit: shade the form. Don't just randomly put in shadows and highlights. Instead, always ask yourself two questions. Where is the light source? And what is the overall form of the object that you're shading? Then place your shadows based on it. Moving on to the third habit, a very common mistake I see beginners and also intermediate artists make in their art is not having enough difference between their darks and lights. I also made this mistake early on when I was still learning how to shade and color my illustrations, where my darks would be in the medium-ish range and my lights would also sit towards that medium-ish range. Because of that, all the colors in the piece ended up living in the middle and nothing would pop. So the overall impression was weak, gray, and lacking in contrast. A really fast way to tell if your art has this problem is to put it side by side next to an illustration that you want to draw like. If your piece looks way more gray and dull compared to it, that can be a sign that it lacks contrast, and you need more separation between the darks and the lights. Do note that this can depend on the art style, however, as some styles are naturally lower in contrast than others, especially if they use pale color palettes. But even then, they would still show that nice contrast in the confines of their palette and style, because contrast is what creates visual interest and tells us what's important and what to look at in a piece. So here's the third habit to take away. End every piece with a contrast check, and make sure your darks are dark enough and lights light enough. This is one of those tiny habits that don't take much time to do, but makes a huge difference in how the final piece looks. Now, the easiest way to adjust the contrast is by using adjustment layers like curves and hue saturation value sliders. But you can also just manually darken and lighten areas as needed. Alright, habit number 4. So early on, I used to really stress about drawing backgrounds because I was first and foremost a character artist. So drawing characters are what I've always enjoyed the most and feel comfortable with. Meanwhile, backgrounds felt like a completely different beast and was overwhelming. Because of that, I'd often end up just avoiding it a lot of the time and would just leave my backgrounds blank. But what took me way too long to realize was that backgrounds aren't all that different from characters. Just like how a character is an object in space, backgrounds are also just objects in space. As such, they follow the same rules and principles of drawing as everything else. You still draw them based on the 3D structure and perspective, and shade them based on how light interacts with the form. The main difference is backgrounds tend to have more texture variety than characters do. For example, in this piece, which is an art commission I did for Sanrio for their virtual festival, there's various textures like wood, grass, leaves, clouds, dirt, and so on. And this is where all the brushes you can find online can help a lot with expressing those textures in your art. Now yes, some background types are harder to draw than others. For example, backgrounds that have a lot of hard surface objects, like buildings or objects that characters are holding and interacting with, are more difficult because the perspective needs to look right to avoid things feeling off or unnatural. But backgrounds that mainly only have natural objects like grass, rocks, leaves, and clouds are a lot more forgiving and easier to draw because there's a lot of randomness to them by default, so they don't require exact perspective to look right. Some other really simple and easy to add backgrounds are gradient color backgrounds, which you can easily make using a soft brush, simple surfaces like the mattress in this piece here, and abstract backgrounds with design and patterns. And you can find lots of different patterns online or on the asset store for free if you use Clip Studio. So when you're adding backgrounds into your art for the first time, I would definitely recommend you start with the easier types first before working your way up to the more challenging ones. But the habit remains the same. Treat backgrounds like characters. This habit will help you lower the bar and anxiety you can have about them, because it helps you realize that if you're okay with drawing characters, you'll also be able to figure out and draw backgrounds as well. By the way, if you want to speed up the progress you make in art, you might want to check out my new course, the Anime Art Accelerator, which just released. It will help you learn and improve your anime art as fast as possible through concise lessons focused on the 20% that gets you 80% of the improvement, step-by-step quests that tell you exactly what to do next, and stylized references and cheat sheets so you don't waste time reinventing the wheel every time you draw. It's designed especially for beginner and intermediate artists who want to speed up their progress. So far, more than 1,000 students have already enrolled, and I've received tons of positive comments about it from them. So, if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you can find out more about it by clicking the link in the description. The fifth habit is to add situations in your art. This one is less rendering technique and more how do you make people actually care and add meaning and story to your art. And I think this matters even more now because we live in an age of AI that can make images that seemingly look pretty from far away. Of course, AI art is like fake jewelry because when you look closer, you realize it's not the real thing and it loses its value. But as an artist, I do think it's becoming increasingly valuable to focus on adding the human things and touches that AI can't do well to further differentiate ourselves from it, and one of those things is storytelling. Now, with character art, there are a few ways to do this, such as expressing a specific mood or vibe with the piece. But this can be technically demanding. An easier way to storytell in your art is to simply add in a situation. Think, what is the character doing? Where are they? What interesting or entertaining thing could you show from it? For example, this is a fan art I drew of the VTuber Lapis, and with the piece, I tried to play upon her character of having a messy room and show a cute situation of what her messy day-to-day life might be. And with this fan art of the VTubers Fuwawa and Mokoko, I tried to play on their character dynamics and drew a fun situation where one is backseating and getting in the way of the other while playing a game. So an important habit to have in this day and age as an artist is to ask yourself when you start a new piece, what situation can I add to this? Doing so will naturally help you make more interesting and entertaining artworks that's not just another pretty picture. Okay, habit 6. Early on, I used to try to speed things up by doing multiple steps at the same time. Like, I'd be designing the character, while also figuring out the pose, while also figuring out the illustration I was going to draw all at the same time. And what would always end up happening was either I'd get overwhelmed and start procrastinating on the piece, or I'd get confused, lost, and not know what to do next, and then eventually abandon the piece. And even when I did push myself to finish, it wouldn't turn out that great. But the thing is, there's this thing called cognitive load. Basically, our brains can only handle a certain amount of mental tasks at one time. Think of it like a computer. If you're anything like me, you've probably experienced opening up a million tabs on your internet browser and then having everything start to lag, slow down, or even crash. That's because each tab takes up a certain amount of memory, and once you've got too many open, your computer's memory can't handle the load anymore. Similarly in art, every process we try to do when drawing takes up cognitive load in our brain. How much load depends on how experienced we are with what we're doing, and the less experienced we are with doing something, the more load it will take. For example, when you're early on in the art journey, everything is new and challenging, so everything takes up a lot of load in your brain. And like a computer, it's really easy to get overwhelmed and just crash. So you want to separate out each step and focus on doing one thing at a time to minimize the load on your brain so you don't get overloaded. But once you get more experienced, parts of the activity start to become automatic, so it takes up less load on your brain. This is why you might see some pros combine and do multiple steps of the art process at once, because they've done it hundreds of times and it's now become automatic and low load to them. So what was happening with me early on was that I was trying to do too much at the same time, and the load would overwhelm my brain, making me want to just procrastinate and avoid doing it. And what I really needed to do was, instead of trying to rush everything and trying to design a character and draw an illustration at the same time, I needed to separate out those tasks and first just focus on designing the character and then figure out the illustration I was going to draw with it. Even when I was drawing the character, I also needed to separate out the steps by first figuring out the overall pose I wanted to draw, then working out the structure of the body, before finally drawing in the details like the face, hair, and clothes on top. So here's the habit: avoid overload. Give your brain permission to focus on just one thing at a time when you draw. And later on, once you become more experienced, your brain will naturally start to combine steps because they will have become automatic for you. Alright, habit 7 is to satisfy your art. Unlike maths, where the objective answer to 1 + 1 is 2, art is subjective. So there's no single correct answer for what your drawing should look like. What looks like a perfect piece to one person may look imperfect to another, and the reverse can also be true. Because of that, there's no clear stopping point, and there's an infinite number of things you could possibly do or change in your art. So it's actually impossible to make a piece perfect. It's a finish line that doesn't exist. This is where I found the concept of satisficing to come in handy. Satisficing is when you set certain standards that once you meet them, the piece is good enough for you to call it done. This doesn't mean you are settling for something mediocre with your art, because you can have high standards when satisficing. But the key thing is that you are intentionally choosing a specific, reasonable finish line instead of endlessly trying to chase perfection. Here's how I personally satisfice when I catch myself starting to slip into the perfectionism trap in a piece. I ask myself 2 questions. First, do the focal points look good? Since I draw character art, this usually means making sure the character, especially the face and hands, look good, since those are the areas we pay attention to the most. If there's other focal points in the piece, like an object or building, I also check those. The second question is, does the piece read clearly when zoomed out? Specifically, I look for whether the silhouettes of the characters read well, and does the viewer's eye go to what's important? Or do they get lost and confused as to what they should be looking at? If the focal points look good and the piece reads clearly when zoomed out, then the piece is usually good enough. Another question that comes in handy for satisficing, especially when I find myself making minor adjustments that don't really matter, is to ask whether I've hit the point of diminishing returns in the piece. The point of diminishing returns is when you start to get less and less the more you put in. In art, it's the point where spending more time on a piece doesn't make much of a difference or improvement in how it looks. For example, you know you're past it when you're spending ridiculous amounts of time for tiny improvements that most people won't even notice, like zooming in 5,000% and making changes at the pixel level. So I found that getting into the habit of satisficing has helped give me permission to accept when a piece is good enough and call it done, instead of wasting endless time getting caught up in the trap of perfectionism. Okay, habit 8. And I think this one is secretly one of the most important if you want to draw consistently long term. So early on in my art journey, I tried to max out my drawing productivity by always trying to draw with 100% focus and no distractions, not even music. And at first, it kind of worked, and I got more done. But over time, that min-maxing made drawing feel more tiring, because trying to give 100% pure focus to something is mentally taxing, and it's hard to keep up for long stretches. And when something feels like a heavy lift every time you do it, you'll naturally feel like procrastinating on it. And it's not necessarily because you're lazy, but because your brain naturally wants to protect you from discomfort and pain, and so tells you, bro, let's not do that again. On the other hand, when doing something feels enjoyable, your brain lights up and wants you to do it again. So enjoyment isn't just a nice bonus, but it's fuel for long-term motivation. Now yes, listening to music can increase cognitive load a bit, which we talked about earlier, because your brain has more to process at once. But I found that if you drop 10% in productivity, but gain a 50% in enjoyment, then that's a good trade. Because when you enjoy something, you naturally show up more. And showing up beats min-maxed full focus art sessions that you avoid. I do want to make it clear, however, that even if you love drawing, not everything about it has to or will be enjoyable. For example, whenever you're learning to draw something new, it's naturally going to be challenging and hard. And that's completely normal and what every artist goes through. But the point is, if we can make the process more enjoyable for only a slight drop in productivity, it's usually worth it because enjoyment makes us more productive in the long run. So here's the habit to take away. Find ways to make the process enjoyable for you. It doesn't have to be anything dramatic. It can simply be putting on some lo-fi music or brewing a comfy cup of tea or coffee when you draw. Personally for me, my drug of choice is green tea and dark chocolate. So remember that consistency isn't just about discipline, but also about making it easy for your brain to say yes to drawing. Habit 9 is get paid to learn. This is an extra habit, but it's game-changing nonetheless. Because when you're able to find a way to monetize your art, you're basically getting paid to draw, learn, and improve more. This becomes a positive cycle that accelerates the progress you make in art, since the more you improve, the more you'll be able to get paid to do it, which then lets you spend even more time doing it. As an artist, the most obvious way to get paid to learn is to start taking on commissions, but you can also monetize by turning your art into merchandise through a platform like Printful, who's kindly sponsoring today's video. They let you turn your art into high-quality products, and because it's print on demand, the product is only made after someone buys it, meaning there's no risk or upfront costs for you. Here's how you can easily turn your art into merch. Just head on over to their website and pick what you want to create, and you can create anything from prints, posters, clothing, hoodies, accessories, mugs, phone cases, and more. Then you upload your art and customize the design until you're happy with how it looks. After that, you just connect Printful to your online shop, and if you don't have one yet, you can create one for free on a site like StoreNV. And if you already do, they integrate with all the major platforms like Etsy, Shopify, TikTok Shop, and more. Once that's done, your merch is live, and whenever someone places an order, Printful will print it, pack it, and ship it straight to them, so you can just focus on drawing and creating. Some of the world's biggest brands like Coca-Cola, Spotify, and MTV use Printful, which means as an independent artist, you get that same level of quality and service for the products you create. You can also sell internationally without extra fees because they've got fulfillment centers all over the world. And you can also add personal human touches to your merch through insert cards and custom messages to make your brand stand out. So if that sounds interesting, you can check Printful out through the link in the description. Okay, so you now know the habits that make good art more automatic. But maybe there's a part of you thinking, okay, Ori, those habits are good and all, but I started later than all those other amazing young artists I see on the internet. So aren't I just screwed? Isn't it too late for me to catch up? Maybe I'm just not talented. And don't even get me started on the problem of AI art. Okay, trust me, as a fellow late starter, I had all of the same fears and doubts myself throughout my own art journey, but I found out they aren't exactly true. Which is why I made this video where I break down why the fears around starting art late in this day and age are actually just common misconceptions, and why beginning late can become one of your biggest advantages as an artist. This was Ori. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye!